the interest that existed in 2021 and 2022 has definitely dipped. I think people forget that this is not a one and done. The economy within any one company feels uncertain to a lot of the employees. Sometimes it takes something incredibly challenging like cancer to really start to understand that we can't control a lot of what happens.
Welcome to the Worthy for 30 podcast. I am your host, Eric Tash. Join us as we delve into the world of impactful business leaders who are setting the bar high. Worthy for 30 carefully curates its guests, engaging with business trailblazers who embody the ethos of doing good while doing well. In each episode, we extract actionable tips and wisdom from these visionaries, offering you a blueprint to merge success with social impact. Ready to elevate your business game? Let's dive in and learn how to do good while thriving. Worthy for 30, where purpose meets profit. Welcome back to another episode of the Worthy for 30 podcast. I'm your host. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Sally Joy Wolf, a well-being advisor, a corporate maven who actually transitioned into being a well-being advisor. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, Sally, you and I, we were connected through the power of social media. I think I was following you. You were following me. We got into a conversation with regards to the people that we know, like Lan Fan and Meet and Malik. And we were going back and forth. And based on what you're working on, we thought, mutually that it would be a good idea to have you on the Worthy for 30 podcast, because this podcast is really premised on the fact on highlighting and showcasing leaders, business leaders, nonprofit leaders, whatever sort of leader who's both professionally ambitious and successful, as well as being very mindful and mission driven and charitable driven in terms of their profession and what they're doing. I don't think, and the people who've come on the show before you don't think of these two ideals as being mutually exclusive. They can do one and the same because they're infusing their core fundamental values in anything that they do professionally. So Sally, I would love, for you to, give the audience, just at least a top line, and we can dig into, where you are today, what you're working on, in terms of working with, different businesses, different corporations, in terms of employee wellness and well-being, and how you got there.
Absolutely. And I love your introduction and how you talk about your guests and Lan, Mita are two folks that I am privileged to now be in the company of in your hot seat. And just that reality that the more we can align what we do, and more so than the what we do, but the who we are with how we show up in the world every day, what a gift it would be if we all were able to do that from the moment we set foot into our careers and all of it. So I'm happy to dig into that. I was a media executive for 20 years or so, and then pivoted into well-being and an ever-evolving portfolio on the heels of what have now been 3 breast cancer diagnoses. So really took the opportunity to dig in a little bit more to positive psychology while I was sick. And the gift of that was I had just turned 40 when I was first diagnosed. And let me know, most people seem to think, and I know I was in this camp of those big birthdays. It's like, wait, what am I doing with my life? Am I on the path I want to be on? And I had been in this media world for 20 years, first through a management consulting firm, then through a business school internship in investment banking that I barely survived. It was like the 10 longest weeks of my life. And I say that now, even after having gone through chemo. So I was not meant to be a banker, but then went in-house in big and small media companies. And ultimately, by the end of it, I spent, it was about 8 years at Time Warner, which then was the parent of HBO and Warner and Turner. And I was running multicultural business strategy, which was really about getting to know and make sure that we were considering all of the evolving demographics of the country and new audiences. And it felt really meaningful and purposeful when we created an incubator to invest in storytellers. So I was a camp counselor for several summers, which won't surprise you given our backgrounds. And And it felt like being a camp counselor. And this is a theme that will then run into my well-being work. But that was like the closest I got to being a camp counselor in the corporate world, which was something I was always trying to do. And suddenly I was finding these amazing artists who were winning awards at Sundance and Tribeca and the Public Theater, but couldn't quite get in the door in traditional Hollywood. And what a privilege it became to not only help to bridge that gap, right? Because Hollywood was about who they knew and they didn't know the right people. And it was through a diverse lens before diversity was like all the rage. And like, well, now it's bad rage, but it became a good rage before it was a bad rage. But I turned 40 and there was this moment of, I don't know if this is what I really want to be doing anymore. And as much as I was so proud of that incubator. And so I'm really big on transparency and had a beautiful relationship with my boss. And we started talking it through. And I actually resigned with her blessing. Like we thought we would go do something else together down the road. And 3 weeks after that resignation, I got handed my breast cancer diagnosis. So I had resigned, not really knowing what I knew. I wanted to do something like well-being felt right, but I couldn't have told you what that looked like. And I resigned. Lisa behind the scenes unresigned me. So talk about leaders who lead with purpose and do the right thing. That was modeled from above because she was like, you're not going anywhere. You have earned your short-term disability. I am not giving up your headcount. And what that gifted me was the chance to take a positive psychology course. And I went really deep in that period of time on all of these amazing modules on meaning and purpose and post-traumatic growth and resilience and growth mindset and knowing your strengths. And I was sitting in this course thinking, how did I not ever learn this? Like this should be the core curriculum for life. I was a psych major undergrad at Harvard, no less. Graduated with all the honors in the world. I was then someone who got 2 masters at Stanford. So I have gone to the schools that been in the headlines for all the wrong reasons in the past year or so. But back in the day, were considered amongst the best, right? And you can see I'm putting air quotes there. And yet I never learned, even studying psychology and education alongside business, never learned these things. And then I got professional development at top companies and also never had exposure to any of these subjects. And I couldn't help but think, how did we get it so wrong? How are we letting people go through our education system and enter the workforce, whatever that means for each person, and not giving everyone these tools for life success? Not for going back to that, who we are. How do we get to know ourselves as individuals in order to shine and bring our best selves forward in the work that we do? And by the way, that work may or may not be a job that gives you a paycheck. That work may be parenting or auntie is my favorite title. In fact, I just had to hang up on, not rudely, but I told my niece I would FaceTime her after you and I finished recording. So that it's not about the title, but it's about how we get to know ourselves well enough to show up in the best way. And that's what I now bring to companies and also to other places that aren't corporate. But really, corporate well-being is, the way I would define it, is how do you as an individual flourish and show up as your best self to whatever you're doing? And then how does that invite someone else to do the same, right? If we each get to know ourselves well enough to bring our brightest light, and then that expands to a team level and then an organization level, it's really win-win in the best possible way.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. If you get to know yourself, you're able to put your best self forward, as again, using your words, that has like a magnetic effect on the people that you come in contact with, you interact with, not just at work, but also personally, right? I had a great boss, and I imagine you described a great boss that you had. When I was working at Prestige Brands, I had a boss who spent 10 years at Procter and Gamble, and he was really, it's like he was giving me like an MBA, on a day-to-day basis. And it was both, business lessons, but also translate into life lessons. because I would come back from the weekend. I'd say, Albert, I did X, Y, and Z, and that I learned from work, but I applied it to personal life. So it's, getting to know yourself, but it's also being able to harness those lessons that you learn at work from those inspirational and purpose-driven leaders that allow you to, again, flourish.
100%. It goes both ways, right? Like I've never understood going back to straight out of college, showing up at a management consulting firm and just sort of getting this advice about your work self and then your other self. And I was like, this seems complicated, like unnecessarily complicated, because the mental cognitive load of having to overthink it. And it felt especially confusing to me because these firms were supposedly hiring us on who we were, right? Not just what you were up here, like your brain, but also how you interacted. And did you get, there was this it was called the Pittsburgh airport test or the conference room test, right? And it was literally like, if I get stranded at the Pittsburgh, I don't know why they chose Pittsburgh, but if I get stranded at this airport with you, or if I have to work late with you every day and have dinner with you every day, are you interesting? And then you get there to any of these jobs. This is sort of, I think true all across the board. And it was like people were holding themselves back. And two things I will say. So to your point about personal, professional, and the lessons that go both ways, all of the work that I do that I would label corporate well-being or well-being, it's agnostic to all of the tools and the workshops that I have and how I coach. I don't consider myself like a corporate quote unquote career coach. I don't talk about my workshops in a way where they're meant to purely be professional development or personal development. They're meant to empower someone to shine as their full self, no matter what. And I actually see well-being at that granular individual level as potentially being the last frontier of DEI. What I mean by that is if we can each show up and own what makes us special and bring that and be able to laugh and cry. And crying's not a bad thing. I actually kid that I help people to cry in a good way, just because the way that I share, and when I go into a company and give, if it's not so much a workshop, but more of a keynote talk, right, at a town hall or something like that, what I have learned from my cancer adventure, let's say, is that the more that vulnerability is a dance, and open-heartedness is a dance. And it requires someone to be comfortable enough to go first. And when you're willing to go first, usually people follow. There's this amazing cartoon that I found. I finally, thanks to LinkedIn, know who to credit for it because I just saw it on social media. Her name's Leah Pearlman. And it has 2 frames, literally simple, black and white. The first, it had 2 stick figures. You have no idea what their gender. They're just plain easy stick figures of 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds could draw them. And one says to the other, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. It sounds a little dirty. You don't know where it's going to go.
Right.
And the second frame, you just see the opening of the chest and a big red heart. I'll show you mine if you show me yours. And so what I have found cancer has gifted me by way of what I would now say is a bit of a superpower is a permission slip to share and to open a dialogue with whoever I'm talking to. And it's amazing to me how many people I will meet who will say something like, I've never shared this with someone else, or in the context of a company, I've never told anyone else hear this, or whatever it may be. And so the gift of when I go work with companies, I find is not just doing that with one person, but inviting them to do that with each other in a way that feels comfortable and lets them really get to know each other in a safe environment and a safe way that doesn't only support them becoming friendlier with each other, but then in moments where something goes wrong at work, you have to call someone and have some sense of urgency because you need help, whatever it is, there's such a deeper foundation of trust and connection there that it makes it easier to also go to the tougher things, the tougher asks, in a safer and more trustworthy way. And here's the bottom line of this, like the literal bottom line. This is win-win. The employees benefit and the companies also see an ROI on the investment of helping employees to connect and to get to know themselves better. The employees, their tenure goes up, their turnover goes down, their absenteeism and presenteeism, right? When you're either not showing up or you're showing up, but you're like effing around on whatever social media, like that all goes down and profitability goes up because people feel that investment and they're thrilled and they're learning about like, how do I find more meaning and purpose in my job? Like that's really powerful.
That is super powerful. And you're saying this is like the last step of DEI, of, helping people feel inclusion via trust, right? And trust. Because I'm a big believer, and you beat me to the punch. Vulnerability, at least this is my Eric's definition. Vulnerability is the quickest route to trust. Like I like that example. You go first, people are going to follow, right? You share something that I haven't really shared before. The other people are going to be like, you know what? It doesn't feel as so, I'm not so apprehensive anymore because so-and-so went first.
100%. And I will give you a real example going back to that amazing boss that I had, Lisa, who unresigned me. Well, before that, she had her own early stage breast cancer diagnosis a few years before mine, was very open about it. And she didn't go through extensive surgery and wasn't out for chemo. So not to minimize what she went through, but she could have gotten away with not telling us if she had preferred not to. I guess that's the way I want to share it, because we wouldn't have noticed. She was having radiation at 7 a.m. in the morning. We wouldn't have been in the office. But she shared it by choice because that was how we built our department. That was how she built our department. She was someone who invited trust, and it went both ways. And she wanted people to feel open to share things with her too. And so when before I was even diagnosed, and you have a mammogram and a sonogram, and right, something potentially shows up. And so I had that mammogram sonogram December 1st of 2015. I didn't have a biopsy till the 10th, and I wasn't diagnosed till the 17th. So that's 2.5 weeks where I was highly distracted, to say the least. And I didn't wait to tell Lisa until the biopsy or until the diagnosis. I told her the moment that this started going on. And so what that gifted me, right? Because I easily could have chosen not to, but instead I opened up, and it meant that she was such a pillar of support, checking in with me, asking if I needed anything, asking if I had heard back. And she was the first person that I ultimately spoke to the day I was diagnosed. And with that, she gave me the names of the 2 doctors I did consults with. Like, she was way more than you would expect from a boss. And it was because I had chosen to let her in. So I just want to give that example, because we all, as leaders, right? She was my leader, but we have the opportunity to build that and to model that and to invite that from our teams. And hopefully when we do it in a hierarchical way, then the peer-to-peer support is there too. And so that's really a choice that Lisa made, that I made, but that made a world of difference, I would say, for both of us, just in terms of the transparency.
Right. And in terms of, and I want to get to, your pivot, right? In terms of, you're in this corporate world, you're working in media. Before your diagnosis, you wanted to go, you was having this inkling of well-being. You didn't know how that's going to manifest. Then you were diagnosed in 2016. How did that take shape in terms of your aspiration to move into well-being? Based on, did it give you more illustration of where you should go and where you should take it?
Yes, but not immediately. So it's sort of like a both end. Like, for me, I knew I had been drawn. So I had this 20-year career in the media industry, and over the course that I chose because I knew nothing about the business world, right? I had this psych degree from a liberal arts school. My mom taught math at a Brooklyn public high school for 40 years. My dad owned a clothing store in Great Neck that was one of the oldest stores in town, but like neither of them were in the corporate world. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but consulting seems like a great way to go do something when you don't know what you want to do. And I chose a media focus because I at least knew that industry as a consumer. So fast forward 20 years, and the more I worked in media, the less of it I actually consumed, because like anything, you're like, oh, I hear about this all day. I don't know that right. Like it was like the heyday of HBO. I would hear about Game of Thrones and all the shows and meetings. And I was like, oh, I never watched a single episode because I hear about this all day. And it's not to say that it wasn't right to go into media initially, but I was 40, like time had passed, and I was increasingly drawn toward well-being as a consumer. So before Brene Brown was a household name, I was watching her TED Talk and reading her books. And I'd gone really deep into dance as an extracurricular, kind of tried it on a whim when I turned 30 or just about then, and fell in love with it. And so for me, and the reason I bring dance up is it was such a gift to really start to get to live in an embodied way and like not just process things with my mind, but also like feel emotion in my body, if that makes sense. And it was fun. And I was getting to know myself in a deeper way. And so I was really drawn to that because I started to have these thoughts in a smaller way, like I shared earlier. How did I not ever do this, like learn this in school? How did I not have self-development workshops in school? Like, how do you go through a core curriculum undergrad, right? We had 2 science requirements and a quantitative reasoning and multiple history and literature. But what about getting to know yourself? Like, isn't that important? And similarly at business school, same thing. And so I was really trying to go down that path. I had my first therapist at 39. Again, how was that not ever a thing? In a way that didn't involve stigma, in a way that was just an invitation to everyone. Like, when you go to college, not only should you get an advisor, like maybe you should get some sort of counselor too. And so fast forward, and then I had this cancer diagnosis and started to learn all about positive psychology. And it didn't crystallize in that moment, like, oh, I should go bring this like into the corporate world, because not to be dorky, but in the Venn diagram of knows the corporate world really well. And you have a lot of people who know corporate, but don't go deep on positive psychology or coaching or resilience or whatever else. Then you have a lot of people who are very deep in all of that, but haven't spent that much time in the corporate world. And then they try to go enter the corporate world to do this work, and they don't quite understand the intricacies of the hierarchy or the culture and all of that, right? And so I was at the nexus of that, and then also acquiring this lived experience with cancer, which I expected to be a one and done, but as it turned out, that wasn't the case. And so anyway, I didn't quite know exactly what my vision was. My initial vision, going back to my roots as a camp counselor, was, so this is in the moment of time, this is 2016, WeWork it had not yet blown up. So it was like, a unicorn. And I had this vision for creating a WeWork that would have been for mind, body, spirit practitioners. And my vision was that, as you know, being in Metro New York, like the real estate that most of these people have is terrible. I mean, I have been in some pretty awful practitioner rooms that, in one case, it's like, oh, you have acupuncture, take your clothing. I'm like, I don't know if I want to take my clothing off in here. And, therapy where like some random heater is like running through the room in some like weird way. And so all of that, I had this vision for creating a beautiful space and knowing that none of these folks would need their actual room 24/7 so they could share. And there was so much efficiency. The camp counselor in me was excited to have them all in this beautiful common space, let collaborations happen naturally, just all of that stuff. And I was really excited about that end piece. However, the A to B of raising money and the B to C of finding real estate and the C to D of the build out, I had not given any thought to the fact that none of those were things that excited me. And then I really struggled to raise $3 million. We can agree now that I got really lucky because I didn't have 10,000 square feet empty during a pandemic. But before I was figuring out, it was like, do I stick with this? I really believed in the vision. And then I got what was a second cancer diagnosis. And then on the heels of that, pretty quickly, a third. So that second diagnosis was a local recurrence in my breast, which is still considered fully curable. But I then had a PET scan that lit up in my hip, that same pretty much, within a few weeks. And so ultimately cancer was diagnosed in my hip. And that is what makes it metastatic, which for breast cancer is synonymous with stage 4 and incurable. And I really became obsessed with that last word, incurable, because for so long, everyone was focused on curing, on curability, on being cured. That is the messaging around breast cancer. If you're vigilant, you catch it early. And if you catch it early, you are cured. So to suddenly be told I was incurable, like forever, right? That's how they look at it. I like to think that's not the case, that science, can change things. However, that's where we are. And so that was really scary. And it was especially scary because I also knew that I had about 6 months left on my Time Warner Cobra, right? I had left Time Warner to go pursue this idea. I am single, so my benefits are my own. And there's a whole lot of other insurance options like Obamacare, small business insurance, but none of those were going to be ideal for my situation. And I had a friend from my consulting days. He was, and I will add that I couldn't go back to Time Warner because my boss, that amazing best boss, unfortunately, the same week my cancer was re-diagnosed, she passed away of pancreatic cancer.
Oh my goodness.
And so Lisa was gone and Time Warner was imminently going to be acquired by AT&T. So as much as I could have asked the CEO to do me a favor, a lot of the lawyers were like, we locked our numbers and I didn't want to go above anyone's head. And a friend of mine at NBC Universal was basically offering me, I can create something for you. Like, I have a huge team. And I said, that is a way too big of a favor. And you just realize, and this is why I also lean into advocacy work now, you realize that when people have the opportunity to help you, first of all, they want to. But what a privilege for me to have such a network where people are able to help me in the way that this friend did, which was, I said, no, that's way too big of a favor. I'll figure this out. Don't worry about me. Unbeknownst to me, he went back to his office. He went to his HR team. He said, she needs to come do something here and not for contractor benefits. She needs our full benefits. And then he called me a few weeks later and his name is Krishan. And what Krishan said was not, do you still need help? Because he was too generous to phrase it that way. He said, are you still available? I could really use your help. Now, let's be clear. He did not need me. It was a maternity fill. I mean, he created something. It looked like he needed me, but the need was far greater on my end. And so that's what really invited the pivot, because while he created something where I was going to go do media strategy work like I had done, I brought in all the positive psychology like on the side because it was just part of who I was. And I started introducing little tips and helping to share things that I observed in a natural way. And people started to notice. And then my friend said, go to what you're doing. Like, HR needs to know about this. And there's something to this. And he really helped me to see what that vision was for well-being in the corporate world. And then I got really lucky. The universe handed me a gift because I finally got to teach my first workshop. They said yes in 2019, but it took a minute. You know how the corporate world works. It's not like always the fastest turnaround, right? It was like, this is Sally's thing. Like, when can we get this in? So I taught my first workshop March 11th, 2020. That was the last day any of us were in that office. So what was initially this slow rollout, like Sally's little positivity thing, all of a sudden I fled the city. I went to my sister's in Connecticut. I got to be auntie in residence because otherwise I was going to be immunocompromised on my own in my apartment in the city. And And so my brother, he's like, let's get you out of the city, drove me to my sister's. And all of a sudden, 2 days later, HR was like, hey, that well-being, that positivity thing you were talking about, people really need that right now. I was like, I know, I've been telling you, because it wasn't the pandemic that really was, but the pandemic exacerbated the need for tools for well-being. It highlighted the need. It made it more maybe universally immediate, but the need was always there. Leaders just didn't fully see that. And so that was really the gift that I was handed, because I was given sort of carte blanche to create the classes that I thought would be the most important in that moment. And I was both teaching workshops. The first one, no one knew who I was, 250 employees logged in, which was 25% of that division, I think, if I have the numbers correct. And that was because people really were craving the community and the tools. And then it just evolved from there. And I did one-on-one coaching and kind of would go into individual teams. So it wasn't just the bigger things. And then I was laid off, which I knew was going to happen because they were having a tough year. But that was the permission slip, right? That whole analogy of when you're pushed out into the world. And so that's really how I started to build this business, was initially internally at NBC Universal, and then taking it out. And it's continued to evolve and grow as companies have started to lean into well-being a bit more. I would also tell you right now, the interest that existed in 2021 and 2022 has definitely dipped, right? I think people forget that this is not a one and done. This is not something where the need goes away because there's no longer a pandemic or whatever else. Because as individuals, first of all, right now the economy is there's a question mark. A lot of companies are having, the economy is good, and yet all these layoffs are happening. So I should rephrase that. But the economy within any one company feels uncertain to a lot of the employees. We're seeing all these layoffs, et cetera. So with that, and even if a company is not having layoffs, jobs are changing in a real fast way. So people are not necessarily feeling secure in their jobs in the way that certainly when, our parents' generation would have, where people worked in the same job or the same company or same employer for so long. And so giving people tools to know themselves better and to feel more resilient in difficult moments doesn't stop being helpful because the pandemic ends, or because, anything else feels more settled, because the reality is as humans, we're always going to be thrown wild cards.
Yes. There are always going to be obstacles. There are always going to be challenges. And it's funny, as we were getting ready for this conversation, Sally, talking about resilience, right? You mentioned, the pandemic's no longer, perhaps employees don't see a real need for well-being, or perhaps well-being is more of an ad hoc instead of a continuous process. Yes, there's a question mark about the economy, but on a micro level, people are at least every time I open up LinkedIn or I open up social media or I talk to someone professionally, it's AI. What's going to happen with AI? How is AI going to impact my job, my description? Looking at the Omnicom IPG merger, talk about resilience. What are people who are now, it's funny, it was talked about as a merger, but it's really an acquisition, I heard, from Omnicom buying IPG. So how do you define resilience? And two, how has your definition of resilience changed over time? And how is that applicable, again, based on some of the events that I've at least listed out, that you would, again, convey to the audience?
Sure. And I think every generation has some version of AI. It wasn't AI, but when you and I were starting our careers, not every company even had a website. Or if they had a website, they didn't think it was an important piece of their business, right? And I worked in magazine companies where they were very excited to tell you, oh, digital is so small. We're not our print business is perfect. We're not doing digital. And I'm not exaggerating when I say a lot of those magazines that were leading brands at the time don't exist anymore because someone else decided digital was important. And then there was the social media wave, and now there's the AI wave. So I just say that because there's been other versions of this, as you know, before. And so that's where that ability to believe that you are not only resilient, but also that you have the skills and the ability to learn whatever it is that will help you succeed with this new place that the world is going. And I think that is what resilience is there's a bit of self-fulfilling prophecy to it. It's not exactly how I would define it, but just to finish out that thought, right? If you think you can learn AI, you're more likely to behave in a way that helps you to learn it, meaning you take a class online or you dabble in it or whatever it is, you use it for some social post or whatever in a small way. And then you become more adept at it. So you continue to foster the belief that you can do it because you're actually doing it, versus the person who's like, oh my God, AI is so scary. I don't know how to use that. So they don't use it. And then they hear everyone else talking about AI and they get more anxious because they haven't used it. So then they're just more convinced they can't do it. And right. So like the self-fulfilling prophecy goes both ways, which is effectively a bit of insight into how resilience works. Now, I used to, I'll take a small detour, the word strong, which I think a lot of people align with resilient. I remember throughout cancer, people would, if they were telling me, oh, you're so strong, that's not when I felt strong because someone else decided that in that moment I was strong. But I know when I felt strong because of how I showed up in a moment or because of how I was navigating the experience or leaning into I said I was never going to miss a dance class during chemo and I didn't. And then after a second surgery, I even might have gone to a dance studio with surgical drains hanging out of my body very carefully. And I obviously wasn't 100%. And that's what I think people misunderstand about strength or resilience, especially. Resilience doesn't mean everything is okay. Like, it's not like, oh, I have stage 4 cancer and I am not also anxious or, scared or angry in moments or sad in moments. Like all of that is real. There are dark pieces of this. And alongside that, there is so much opportunity that I have had. We would probably not be talking here if I hadn't popped into your social feed. And that was because of what I was posting about, insights that I've had during a health journey, right? So it all becomes connected. And so the way that I would define resilience is really about the opportunity we have to be resilient and to activate a resilience muscle is about looking at the obstacles and navigating the obstacles and also leaning into the opportunity, finding the meaning that can exist within that challenge or difficult life moment. And the beauty of that, and this is why I love to think of it as a muscle that we can all build. Cancer is one word that has a million different paths within it. But even if you're looking at two people who have stage 4 breast cancer, even if the biology looks the same, even if we kind of look similar as humans, the meaning that we may each choose to take or make or create from that journey is going to be unique to us. It's going to derive from our personal values, from our life experiences, from our individual strengths and what we see, like what we want to make of it. So the actual meaning is subjective and a choice and has to be genuine to you. But whether or not we lean into meaning, whatever that meaning is for me, for someone else, if we lean into it, we are more likely to feel resilience. So that's that. It's a bell curve. I'm going to get to it. I already talked about Venn diagrams. We'll do one bell curve and then I won't make any more charts. I was a management consultant. But if you make a bell curve of resilience, every single person has heard of PTSD. Everyone. If I go give a talk and ask people to raise their hands if they've heard of PTSD, every hand will go up. If I ask people to raise their hands if they've heard of post-traumatic growth, a couple, not a ton. And post-traumatic growth is within our reach. That is that resilient, that outlier, good end of the resilience bell curve. And making meaning out of the challenge is one of the best ways to get there.
That is, could not have said it better myself. Maybe even, that is a great place to stop this conversation, because that is incredible, Sally. It's incredible insight, incredible perspective. Being on the front lines, working with employers, who are trying to institute well-being at their offices, at their organizations, and not having that well-being, let's say, relegated to one part of the organization, have it pervade all the facets of the organization. Because as you can see, again, correlation doesn't equal causation, but the correlating impact of well-being is higher job satisfaction, higher personal satisfaction, higher retention. So even in these uncertain times, making sure that employees are being well taken care of, it should still be imperative, should still be a top priority. And also, to sum up what you're saying is, each generation has its, inflection points. AI is the most recent. You can talk about social media, you talk about digital, and you can keep on going backwards. But at the same time, it's again leaning into that challenge and finding meaning and finding that opportunity. What is this challenging moment really teaching us about ourselves, about our profession, as well as who we are professionally, and really allowing life to unfold as much as we want to control all different aspects of our lives. Just letting things just unfold naturally and letting spontaneity at some point, in some respect, in some regard, let it take its course.
Yeah. I'll just say one more thing, because control is something we all crave. Yes. And I definitely am a type A, recovering control freak, let's say. And I think that sometimes it takes something incredibly challenging like cancer to really start to understand that we can't control a lot of what happens, right? Like, because I will tell you all the things that I have tried to totally control in my life that will seem silly, but nonetheless, right. And yet it's the bigger things that give us the moment to pause and say, okay, I don't wish cancer on anyone or any big challenge, right? None of us would wish that on the other. If we all share the lessons, the ability to lean into uncertainty in whatever it is and use those as a bridge to connect and elevate each other, because my hope is that my lessons from cancer and your lessons from something else and someone else's lessons from someone else, well, great. None of us have to go through those other things. And unfortunately, maybe sometime we will, but if we share them, then what a gift, because we're collectively learning so much. And if we bring all of those lessons, because at the end of the day, employees are humans. We are humans first, right? We're humans before we go to work. We're humans after. When we retire, we're still human, all of that. So if we're able to elevate each other as humans, right, the humanity of that, then that changes a workplace. And that's why it's not just a learning and development class or professional development. It is literally in the culture and the DNA of a company that does it right, that the people are going to thrive.
Yeah.
And that's what we all want.
Yes. We all want to collectively thrive and do as best as we possibly can. But again, leading with our humanity and leading with our human foot first. Excellent. Well, yes. Sally, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And we'll talk soon.
I hope so. Have a beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining this episode of the Worthy for 30 podcast. Stay tuned for more insights from impactful business leaders. Don't miss out. Follow us on all podcast platforms to catch every conversation.